They're not doing their room. Nobody. Hey, how you doing?
Virtual thing. Still got it.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you here this morning, those here in the building, those on Zoom, where it is morning, and those on YouTube, where it is whatever time it is when you're watching it. So that's the good thing about YouTube. Okay, so today we are finishing out the spring quarter. So welcome to the visitors, as well as those on here and those on Zoom and YouTube. So we're finishing out the spring quarter, which has been costly sacrifices. During the month of May, we were in the Old Testament, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, and then now Nehemiah. So next week will be the summer quarter, and I believe Sunday morning we'll be doing sacred altars and holy offerings. Correct. So that'll be Genesis in the month of June. July will be from the Gospels, and then August will be from the Epistles. And then Wednesday night, summer quarter, will be the King and His Kingdom, which will be lessons about Jesus, primarily from the book of Matthew, right? So doing the book of Matthew. next quarter in June. So today is a covenant renewal, and this, of course, will be from the book of Nehemiah. And the covenant in question here will be the Mosaic covenant that the Lord had with Moses. Most of that is chronicled or mentioned in the books of Exodus and Leviticus. So, get on. So, book of Nehemiah. As we mentioned last week when we were doing the book of Ezra, Ezra and Nehemiah were originally one book, one work, and it was called the book of Ezra, or the book of Esdras in Greek. The Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the scriptures, dating about 4th, 3rd century BC, broke them into two in the Greek version, but the earliest Hebrew version, where the two are broken into two books, dates back to 15th century AD, so not that long ago. As Nehemiah's personal memoirs, or we say his diary if he had one, are a large part of the book here. Debate over who wrote it. Of course, his memoirs were written by Nehemiah, but perhaps Ezra or the chronicler, sometimes thought to be Ezra, then put them together into the work that we now know as the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, like Daniel, prayer was a big part of his life, and we have 9 of his prayers recorded, just like there are a lot of prayers of Daniel in the book of Daniel. This book covers a 12-year period, 444 to 432, and it coincides with the latter part of Ezra, and Malachi was also a contemporary of the two. As I said, it's his memoirs, and I, the first person personal pronoun, I is 110 times in the book of Nehemiah, where his name Nehemiah is only mentioned 5 times. And Nehemiah is the only historical book written in the first person. I did this, I did that, I saw this, I saw that. So here's sort of a timeline of the two. I'm just going to do 2 items showing, we mentioned this last week, that there was a 48-year period between the fall of Jerusalem to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, 586 BC, until the first group of exiles was allowed to return under Cyrus, and that was in 538 BC. And the other one was the 70 years, remember 70 years of exile. Well, that aligns up with the destruction of the temple 586 BC until temple restored, worship restored, sacrifice restored, 516 BC. So that was 70 years there. So here's this chart I showed last week, and it shows the 3 returns. Let's see if this works. Yes. The first return under Zerubbabel, where shortly after the edict of Cyrus was issued saying that the Judah and Benjamin could return. They didn't have to return. Those whose spirit the Lord had moved could return to Jerusalem. And Cyrus said he had a mandate to rebuild the house of the Lord. So he sent these people back to do that. They got there, they got started on it, but then the peoples of the land were first offered to help, but then they became in opposition, and they caused the work to cease. And then it didn't pick up again until Ezra chapter 6 here, with urging from Haggai and Zechariah. They started again, and then the temple is finished about 516 BC. We also here have the Battle of Marathon, start of the race here. That was under Darius I, Persian, and he had it in his mind to go and take the city of Athens, the Greeks. But he failed, even though he had a much larger force. So that was under him. And then we have Esther there during the time of Xerxes. And then the second returns here. We have renewing the faith here under Ezra, when Ezra returns, and then he does the restoration. He reads to them the law and that sort of thing. And then the third one here, 1750 here, almost 5,000 here. The third return, Ezra, I have one there. Because Ezra, he just says, I returned. He doesn't mention any other people, though he was an important man, so I'm sure he had others who accompanied him. There's the rebuilding of the wall, which took about 54 days. And then he also restored some social justice. They weren't taking care of the poor, so he got them on track there. You know, you need to help the poor, that sort of thing. And also some spiritual renewal during the time of Nehemiah. And then, as you see, this Ezra, Nehemiah, and Malachi all coincide about the same time period. And this just shows the map of the return. Let's see, this is the one under the Zerubbabel and then one under Ezra. Most of the Jews settled in this area around Nippur. Ezekiel says he was there by the Kibar Canal, and that was in Babylon. But Nehemiah, when he returned, he, of course, was cupbearer to the king, Artaxerxes, an important position. And he was in Susa, and that was the summer capital of the empire. It's in the mountains. It actually is close to the same altitude as Colorado Springs is. It's about 6,000 to 7,000 feet. So, of course, it was a lot cooler there during summertime than it would be in Babylon. So Nehemiah returned from Susa. So here's another timeline. 538 BC, this was Ezra 1 through 6. Cyrus was the king. And this was his edict where he said, as many as whose heart the Lord had moved could return back to their homeland. And they were to rebuild the temple. And he gave them some money from the treasury. Also, their neighbors gave them money. And he returned the gold and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had taken when he sacked the temple. Temple work began there, and they also built the altar and then conducted the Feast of Tabernacles, New Moon Feast, and that sort of thing. Then we go to Ezra 7 through 10. Artaxerxes is king. Ezra is allowed to return, again, the second return, and then finances were provided, some additional to do work there in Jerusalem. And then he addresses problems with intermarriage. He returns about 80 years after the first group, and he noticed that the group that had returned, those 50,000 that had returned with Zerubbabel, were intermarrying with the people of the land. These were people that the Assyrian king had moved there to take the place of the Jews that were taken into exile. So they had intermarried with them. And then finally, Nehemiah, Artaxerxes, again, is king. Nehemiah is his cupbearer. We're not told much about him. You know, we're told about Joseph. How does a Semite slave go from prison to being the governor of Egypt? And Genesis takes several chapters and explains his rise, but there's no mention on how Nehemiah could be elevated to such a high position as cupbearer to the king. And of course, he built the wall, and it went up in about 54 days despite all the opposition. So Ezra reads the law. This is the first thing he came back, and is actually prompted by the people. We're in Nehemiah now, chapter 8, verse 1. So this will be an introduction. Our lesson today doesn't actually start until about the middle of chapter 10. So all the people gathered as one man, they had a common purpose, into the square that was before the water gate. And they told Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses that the Lord had commanded Israel. So the water gate is right there. So notice it's not up here on the temple square. It's down here. And he says there is a square down here which is not depicted in this drawing here. But the important thing about it being there on the square versus on the Temple Mount means that women could be there. So this could be men, women, and children. So Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly, both men and women, and all who could understand what they heard. Think of children who could understand, older children, teenagers, that sort of thing. And on the first day of the month, he read the law to them like they requested. And we're told also that there were Levites throughout the crowd when he was reading the law, and they would explain things to them if they had any questions. And he read from it facing the square before the water gate from early morning until midday in the presence of the men and the women and those who could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive to the book of the law. So he comes back, reads to them the book of the law, because it's been a long time, or not at all, for some of the people there to hear from the book of the law. So here's more of an introduction until we get to Nehemiah 10:38. So the Israelites who were there, they separated themselves, first thing, from the foreigners, and they confessed their sin in associating with them and marrying them. And they make a commitment, a firm commitment to the Lord, and it's documented and it's sealed, and the people who agree to this document, to this commitment, then their names are on the document. They're in the seal. And then those named in the covenant. Nehemiah 10:1-27. Those are short 27 verses just containing names. So these, the names in Nehemiah 10:1-27 are the ones who agreed to this covenant, which essentially is what was already in the old covenant. They're going to say, okay, we'll do it now. So, now the rest of the people, those that didn't sign the document, or those who weren't on that seal, and this includes priests, includes Levites, includes gatekeepers, sometimes that's called doorkeepers of the temple, musicians, and temple servants. So gatekeepers, musicians, and temple servants, these were all positions that David had created while he was preparing for the temple to be built. All the people who separated themselves from the neighboring peoples for the sake of the law of God, together with their wives and their sons and daughters who were able to understand. So that here pretty much tells you that these are the children, the sons and daughters. All these now join their fellow Israelites, the nobility, and bind themselves with a curse and an oath to follow the law of God given through Moses, the servant of God, and to obey carefully all the commands, regulations, and decrees of the Lord, our Lord, which is essentially Yahweh, our Adonai.
So is that curse what will happen to you if you don't
Yeah.
do the oath?
May so-and-so happen to me if I don't do this. Bad things happen to me if I don't keep this. And what did they say about oath? Let your yea be your yea and your nay be your nay. Keep your oath. Now here's the first one. Now if you count all of them, we know that there's about 613 commandments. So he doesn't go through all of them. He'll go through, let me tell you, he'll go through about 6 of them, 6 of these commandments. The one foremost, the one he spends most of the time on, is intermarriage. Then keeping the Sabbath will be. Then he'll talk about keeping the sabbatical year. That's 2 elements to keeping the sabbatical year. 7th year, the ground gets rest. 7th year, you forgive debts. Then there's the temple tax. Pay for the upkeep of the temple, then tithing, and then finally, do not neglect the house of the Lord. Will be the 6 ones that is covered in Nehemiah. So, do not give our daughters in marriage to the peoples or around us, or take their daughters. What about the sons? Okay, the verbs give and take reflect the custom that the parents give their daughters to go live with their husbands, and they bring daughters from other families to be wives of their own sons. Hebrew expression reflects a patriarchal perspective. If you think back to the parable of the 10 virgins, they were there waiting with their lamps and their oil lamps, and they're waiting there with the bride's house. They're waiting for the groom to come to the house there, take his bride, and then they will follow him to the household of the groom, and that's where the wedding celebration will be. So the groom comes to take the bride and then brings the bride home. So it's giving daughters and taking daughters. Okay, a little bit on intermarriage. We're going to go back to the book of Ezra, because Ezra teaches on this. After these things had been done, this is shortly into where Ezra actually is coming. That starts in chapter 7. So basically, talking about the genealogy there in Ezra chapter 8. After these things had been done, the officials approached me, the nobility. The people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the land, with their abominations from their Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Egyptians, and the Amorites. So there's a few more names here than were mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 7, where they're told to stay away from these people. The Moabites. Remember that woman Ruth, how bad she was and how she deluded poor Boaz? Boy, no, Ruth wasn't that bad, was she? The Egyptians and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters to be wives for themselves. Again, we have the same language, take daughters, and for their sons, so that the holy race has mixed itself with peoples of the lands. Holy race, this is the only place in the Bible that mentions holy race, that they were a holy race and they should remain a holy race. What does Peter say that we are? A holy priesthood, or holy priesthood. We're a holy priesthood. Yeah, belonging to God. And in faithlessness, the hand of the officials and the chief men has been foremost. So the people who should be setting the example were the worst perpetrators of doing this. Of course, they probably had more access to, the peoples of the land. Hey, let's marry our daughter off to one of these officials. And so the nobility, the officials, were the worst offenders of this, intermarrying with the peoples around them. As soon as I heard this, I tore my garment, my cloak, and I did what? He pulled his hair from my head and beard and sat appalled. Probably had sackcloth and ashes too. So he's hurting himself, pulling his hair. Did he pull anyone else's hair? Doesn't say he did. Well, we'll get to somebody else pulled the other people's hair. Then all who trembled at the words of the Lord, God of Israel, because of the faithlessness of the returned exiles, gathered around me while I sat appalled until the evening sacrifice. And at the evening sacrifice, I rose from my fasting. Well, how long was he fasting? All day? Doesn't say.
So, was this mixing of God's people with the other nations, did that happen before the exile, during the exile, or after the exile?
It could have happened during those 70 years too, because remember, they took they took the best of the people. They took Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Ezekiel. They took them, they left a remnant behind. Bible talks about three groups. Those who were left behind, those who were taken into captivity, and then there were some who went to Egypt or something like that. So he left some behind, but these were the poorest of the people. And they seemed to be more concerned with the nobility, especially the priesthood. Priest, if you wanted to be a priest, you pretty much had to present your documentation that you were pure. And sometimes that documentation actually went through the matriarchal line. So at the evening sacrifice, there were morning sacrifices and evening sacrifice. I arose from my fasting with my garment and my cloak torn, and fell upon my knees and spread out my hands to the Lord my God. So he's prostrate before the Lord because of what the people had done. He didn't do this, but the people had done this. And now, O our God, so this is a prayer of Ezra to God. And now, O our God, what shall we say after this? For we have forsaken your commandments, which you commanded by your servants, the prophets, saying, the land that you are entering to take possession of it is a land impure, with the impurity of the peoples of the lands, with their abominations that have filled it from end to end with uncleanness. Ooh, doesn't sound like a good place to go, does it? Therefore, do not give your daughters to their sons, neither take their daughters for your sons, and never seek their peace or prosperity. So we have the same thing here in Ezra as we will have it in Nehemiah. And never seek their peace or prosperity. So don't wish them well, he says here. That's kind of strange. That you may be strong and eat the good of the land and leave it for an inheritance to your children forever. Forever and forever. Therefore, let us make a covenant with our God to put away all these wives and their children. Well, all this covenant is doing is reiterating the covenant that they already had back in Deuteronomy chapter 7.
So you're talking about a divorce.
Yeah, from their old ways. And well, maybe they didn't know it. You know, they don't have a copy of the law in their house. And Ezra now is reading it. Did they have anyone there to read it during those 80 years from time they returned until Ezra came? And what about during the time they were there? We know the people came to Ezekiel, and then he would teach them. Ezekiel was a priest, and then he would let them know. He was also a prophet, and he told them what was going on back in Jerusalem. Okay. Let us make a covenant with our God to put away all these wives and their children. What about put away our wives and our children? Aren't these their children? They're sort of divorcing themselves from the situation. Okay, well, put away these wives and their children. Wouldn't that be hard to do? Think about it. Putting away your children. According to the counsel of my Lord, and these who trouble at the commitment of our God. And let it be done according to the law. Arise, for it is your task, and we are with you. Be strong and do it. So this is Ezra telling them to be strong and do this. It's going to be hard, you know. Divorcing. Some versions have divorce your wives and then get rid of your children.
There would be wailing and crying and perhaps anger.
Yeah. To put them away, does that mean that, you know, that you give them their money, you know, help them with support until they get help take care of those children?
Joseph, when he found out that Mary was carrying with child, he was ready to put her away, but privately, quietly. And the angel persuaded him not to.
Yep. She's still going to have that baby. She's going to be unmarried. That almost seemed to me like he was washing his hand of the situation. Hey, she's not my baby. I'm innocent. So, and a proclamation was made throughout Judah and Jerusalem to all that returned exiles that they should assemble at Jerusalem. They didn't have that far to go because this is only Judah and Benjamin. And that if anyone did not come within 3 days by order of the officials and the elders, all his property should be forfeited. That's not good. and he himself banned from the congregation of the exiles. This is sort of like being excommunicated or being put out of the synagogue in the New Testament. You didn't want that. You came back and you don't have any property. You know, it's like you're a slave or something.
Basically, they were taking away their right of claiming to be of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Taking away their status, you know. Then all the men of Judah and Benjamin assembled. That got them. You know, take away your privileges as being a Jew. Take away your property. They assembled at Jerusalem within 3 days. It was the 9th month and 20th day of the month, and all the people sat in the open square before the house of God, trembling because of this matter and because of the heavy rain. This is about the 3rd week in December, the rainy season. Cold, rainy, probably windy. So this was not a good time. You want to get out of there as soon as possible. Get into your homes or get into shelter. The people are many, and it is time of heavy rain. We cannot stand in the open, nor is this a task for 1 day or for 2, for we have greatly transgressed in this matter. So they're not going to settle this matter while they're standing out in the rain. So we need to settle it, you know, in the future here. It's going to take some time and hopefully better weather when we settle this. Let our officials stand for the whole assembly. Let all our cities who have taken foreign wives come at appointed times, and with them the elders and judges of every city, until the fierce wrath of our God over this matter is turned away from us. So those who had taken foreign wives, plus elders and judges from their city, come, and they're going to look at this matter. Then the returned exiles did so. Ezra the priest selected men, heads of fathers' houses, according to their fathers' houses, each of them designated by name. So Ezra selected some men also to settle this matter. On the 1st day of the 10th month, they sat down to examine the matter. And by the 1st day of the 1st month, they had come to the end of all the men who had married the foreign women.
There doesn't seem to be at this particular stage any indication that those who had taken foreigners into their families by marriage and had children, that there is no attempt or indication that they were converted to Judaism.
Talking to these people here, the one. Okay, we'll look at that. We'll look at some of that. Those putting away their wives and children. Ezra selected heads of houses to examine the matter. Right? The examination was conducted over a 3-month period on a case-by-case basis. So you've got the foreign wife. Here's some people from your town. They know you. They know your wife. They know your children. They know what you've done. Can you imagine Boaz and Ruth coming here? Sorry, Boaz, you need to send her back. No. Those sending away wives are listed in Ezra chapter 10, 18 through 44. So after this was taken place, Ezra 10, 18, 44 lists the men who had to get rid of their wives. So how many were there? There were 17 priests, 10 Levites, and 84 of Israel. So total of 111 out of 51,650 who returned from Babylon sent away their wives. Less than 1%. So maybe those who said this is a big problem, maybe they were around those that, you know, had wives, and these wives were turning their husbands away from Judaism. So most wives apparently had adopted Judaism as their faith and were not sent away. Your people will be my people, your God will be my God. So this is Nehemiah looking, I think this is Nehemiah chapter 13. He's looking back on things. In those days also I saw the Jews who had married women of Ashdod, a Philistine city, Ammon and Moab. There's Ruth again. And half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, which Philistine, and they could not speak the language of Judah, Hebrew, but only the language of each people. So do you think the children spoke the language of their mother or their father? Any of you heard that? Who brings up the kids? Mama. Yeah, so it's the language of the mama. And I confronted them and cursed them and beat some of them and pulled out there. Who's pulling out other people's hair? Nehemiah. He's smart. He's not pulling out his own hair. Why should I pull out my hair? I'm going to pull your hair out.
Maybe he's bald.
Yeah. Like Elisha. Right? And I made them take an oath in the name of God. So is this different from the oath that they took under Ezra, saying, you shall not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons, or take their daughters for yourselves? And then Nehemiah does what Chronicles didn't do. He points out that Solomon sinned by doing this very same thing. And even though Solomon had wisdom from God, foreign women made him sin. So he points out an example here that they knew. So if Solomon can sin because of marrying these foreign women, then certainly you're not any better than Solomon. So what do you think? Were Israelite women given in marriage to foreign men able to send their husbands away? Which way? The men were told to send their wives away. Could the wives send their husbands away? Could a woman divorce her husband?
That'd be hard.
If not, did they induce their husbands to give up their gods and serve the Lord? Well, we could say that the women did not have divorced their husbands because these women were their problem. Right? Did their children speak Hebrew? If these foreign women could seduce Israelites to serve their gods, could the Israelite women induce their husband to serve Yahweh? Why not? What does Paul say about this? To the married I give this charge, not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And the husband should not divorce his wife. To the rest, I say, I, not the Lord. So this is Paul speaking, that if a brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of his husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. And this is in Corinth. Remember, they were worshiping foreign gods. They would go to their temples, sacrifice, eat food, sacrifice to idols. And Paul is telling them, don't divorce this person, because maybe you will convert them and they will be made holy because of you.
Back in the day when Jesus was alive, those who write commentaries said that marriage had become so convoluted and watered down that a husband could just turn to his wife and say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you, that's it.
And he had to give her a certificate of divorce. The certificate of divorce is actually for the benefit of the woman. It's her emancipation documentation. Because he can say, I divorce you, and then if she didn't have any proof, she could be out with somebody else, and then he could accuse her of adultery. But she said, no, I've got proof that you did this. And also with this divorce document, if she didn't do anything, then he has to return her dowry. So this divorce document was important. It freed her from any commitment, and it required him, according to the judges, if she didn't do anything wrong, then he would have to give back her dowry, and that would help to support her. When the neighboring peoples bring merchandise or grain to sell on the Sabbath, we will not buy for them. So there's the second one, keeping the Sabbath or on any holy day. Every seventh year we will forego working the land and will cancel all debts. So don't buy on the Sabbath. So here's the Sabbath laws. Nehemiah, he actually saw people breaking the Sabbath. This is his recollection at the end. In those days I saw in Judah people treading the wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of loads, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on that day that they sold food. People from Tyre also, who lived in the city, brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and they sold them on the Sabbath day, even in Jerusalem itself. Not outside the walls, they were actually coming into town. So the second one, every seventh year, we will forego working the land and cancel all debts. So here's that sabbatical year. Now, they had not been keeping this. And this was one of the reasons they went into captivity for 70 years. Who owns the land? The land must not be sold permanently because the land is mine, and you are but aliens and my tenants. When God put Adam and Eve into the garden, who owned the garden? God owned the garden. What were they to do? What were Adam and Eve to do? Tend the garden and stay away from one tree. That wasn't too hard, was it? He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword. Mentioned that. And they became servants to him and his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. Does that mean if they were to do that every 7 years and they had to fulfill 70 years, for 490 years they hadn't done this? So God was giving his land some rest. And then cancel all debts. At the end of 7 years you shall grant a release of debts. And this is the manner of the release. Every creditor shall release what he has lent to his neighbor. He shall not exact it from his neighbor, his brother, because the Lord's release has been proclaimed. So the sabbatical year for the land and for the debtor. Okay, we assume responsibility for carrying out the commands to give a third of the shekel each year for service to the Lord. And this third of a shekel, covers the cost of the showbread, the grain offerings, the burnt offerings, all those sacrifices. Somebody has to pay for it. So this is this shekel here. And remember in the New Testament where the collectors of the temple tax came to Peter and said, does your master pay the temple tax? So that was still going on at the time, New Testament time, or during the time of Jesus. We, the priests, the Levites, and the people have cast lots to determine each of our families to bring to the house of the Lord set times each year contribution of wood to burn on the altar of the Lord our God. So this altar, they were doing these sacrifices, especially the burnt offerings. It takes a lot of wood to create the fire, to fuel the fire that for all these sacrifices. So they have taken a vow that they would, or cast lots to determine which families, which groups would bring the wood for the altar. We also assume responsibility for bringing to the house of the Lord each year the first fruits of crops and of every tree. Supposedly the first fruits were the best fruits, right? But who wants the first pancake? You don't want the first fruits of the pancake, do you? As it is also written in the law, we will bring the firstborn of our sons, of our cattle, of our herds, and of our flocks to the house of our God, the priests ministering there. There's that redemption of the firstborn and redemption of the firstborn of people and the firstborn of animals. Moreover, we will bring this to the storerooms of the house of our God, to the priests, to the first of our ground meal, of our grain offerings, of the fruit of the trees, our new wine and olive oil, and we will bring a tithe of our crops to the Levites. And for it is the Levites who collect the tithes in the towns where we work. So this talks about tithing, that they will bring a tenth to the Levites, and that is to support them. And then they also keep that in the storerooms of the temple. A priest descended from Aaron is to accompany the Levites, so they have a priest going with them, and they'll make sure that the tithes are properly collected and they go where they need to go. Includes grain, wine, oil, and any articles that are needed for the ministry of the temple. And then this is for Solomon's temple. Something was similar there for Zerubbabel's temple, and this has 3 levels here, and then this is the storerooms where all this stuff is kept, and there's something on the other side. And of course, Nehemiah criticizes the people for not doing this. Malachi also says, you are robbing me, and you say, well, how have we robbed you? You've robbed me with your tithes. You haven't been tithing properly. You haven't brought into the storeroom the necessary materials, food and supplies for the support of the temple. I think that's all. Okay, any questions? Any answers?
When you add up everything that they were contributing, some have said it would have equaled somewhere around 25% of their wealth, their livestock, their grain, their fruits, their veg.
How many of you heard of the second tithe? There's the primary tithe. The second tithe is for the support of Jerusalem. It states that when you go to Jerusalem, Passover, Pentecost, booths, you're supposed to spend 10% of your income in Jerusalem to support them there. Imagine you're going on vacation. Okay, you're going to go on vacation to Italy, and you need to spend 10% of your income while you're on this vacation. You'd have a nice time, couldn't you? So that's the second tithe. This is the tithe you spend when you go up for your feasts. Okay, so next week is sacred altars and holy offerings, and the lesson is the offerings of Cain and Abel, Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 through 16. And then on Wednesday, it's the king's birth. So that's it.
Thank you, Warner.
All right.